Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you? Boy, you've aged a lot better than I have.
Yeah, you're very kind. Thank you. Long time no see.
Yeah, no kidding. We used to see each other in every single class, I think, our first 3 years.
I think so.
Yeah.
Congrats on your success. Good for you.
Yeah. Are you living in Ithaca?
I am.
That's
I
awesome.
am. I never left. Fell in love
Yeah.
and stayed in the area, so I'm
It's a
here.
it's a great city. I've got a friend from high school who lived there all her life. So
Yeah. Well, welcome. We have a variety of students with us today. They're pretty excited to hear your story and how you got started and just they're going to have the opportunity to type in some questions too on the chat so that they can, interact with you a little bit. And I can unmute them if they raise their hand too. So,
okay, great. And I was gonna say normally I can see the chat on the right side. I don't see it today. Why is that? Do I not have my full screen up, maybe? Yeah, I'm usually I can see the chat questions like on the right side when I do these.
yeah, you should be able to. If you go to the bottom of your screen and hit the little chat button, it should pop up.
There it is. Perfect. Thank you. Good.
Sure thing.
All right, perfect. Yeah, and that way you don't have to feel I mean I can probably if you want, Jen, and if it's easier, I can just kind of take the questions that way it'll keep the flow of the conversation going if it's easier on you.
Absolutely. I'm not going anywhere because I'm totally interested in this. But yeah, take
Okay,
it away.
perfect.
You're in
All
charge.
right. Well, hello everyone. First of all, thanks for joining me in light of these pretty crazy circumstances. As you could probably guess by the interplay, Jen and I were classmates at Ithaca. I believe she was a 95 too, because literally we had every single communications, television, radio class. I'm not sure. I think Jen was also part of the last group at the park that could do the major of television, radio with a minor in broadcast or a concentration of broadcast journalism. So we were in a very real sense, and the two started to separate TV, radio, and journalism. But we had a ton of classes together, and she probably was semi aware of the fact that I was doing probably a lot of what you're doing. I was on ICB doing a sportscast. That was actually the first time I, got on the air. I didn't have anything coming out of high school. My hometown didn't offer it. I'm from a little town. It's a home of Allegheny College, probably to shorten the conversation, hour north of Pittsburgh and 45 minutes south of Erie, probably 4 hours from Ithaca, door to door. So I didn't have, it's not like my dad was a broadcaster. I had no contacts whatsoever. So when I went to Ithaca, it was, kind of fight for whatever niche you could find in the broadcasting school. And at that time, there was a tremendous degree of talent. I was lucky to get on the air with a sportscast on WICB, I think my fifth day of freshman year. And it was the 6 a.m.er. And I wasn't any better at 6 a.m. Back then than I am now, and that probably most of you are. So it was kind of a quote unquote, honor, but it was tough. But slowly I started doing things on ICTV. I was a host of the Gridiron Report. I don't know whether you still do that. I bridged the gap between Butterfield and Mike Welch. So when I hosted, Mike Welch was just getting going as a coach. I think he retired a couple years ago. Maybe some of you were still in school. My news anchor for 2 years, I was a sports guy on ICTV 54. It was called then. I have no idea what it's called now. But my news anchor was a guy far more successful than yours truly. That's David Muir. He and I took all the same classes. Jen, I'm sure, was in most of those classes. He was a classmate of ours, and he was the news guy, and I was the sports guy. And, you can kind of figure out the rest. He's, for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure you do, he did commencement a few years ago, and he's the World News Tonight anchor. He replaced Peter Jennings, who was an icon when Jen and I were growing up. And then after that, I mean, unlike Jen, who kind of immediately built a word for herself, I crawled back to my hometown. I couldn't get an ESPN job. I was, by the end of college, I'd done everything. I was the football play-by-play guy. I was doing the Gridiron Report. I was, kind of big fish in a small pond. And who knows, I might have developed, and Jen can maybe answer that for you after I'm off the call. I might have, thought I was Mr. IC. But I crawled back to my hometown, which I was one of those guys who said, hey, you ain't seeing me ever again. Like when I leave this, like I was one of those guys who wanted to get out and sit in the world, but there I was crawling back for $4.25 an hour, $50 per game for play-by-play. And then I got a raise to $75 a game. But I was working minimum wage, and back then it was minimum wage, $4.25 an hour. And so I was at my hometown radio station. I couldn't get out of there for 4 years. I mean, that's what a lack of talent I had. I mean, I had nothing. And I was doing college football, basketball, baseball, all the stuff I did at IC, small college, Allegheny, Lake Ithaca, Division III school, just grinding away. And I finally got my first break for a minor hockey team in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Went out there for 3 years. The team went belly up in the summer. And when you're a hockey play-by-play guy, you do not want to lose your job on August the 1st, and I did. I had a new wife, new house, new car. I had bought her, again, this goes right back to the same mistakes I made probably when I was a senior at IC. I bought her a car that you could drive 3 months a year, one of those Mazda Miatas. It was the Dallas Cowboy blue silver thing. I bought that and literally lost my job like 2 weeks later. We were a young married couple, just married, and we had 3 cars. That was real intelligent. One of several mistakes I've made over the course of my life. So I had a choice. I could have gone. I had nothing. August, lost my job. All the hockey play-by-play gigs are filled. By then, I had kind of veered off course and not been doing football, or basketball, or baseball. And I'll come back to that maybe later. But bottom line is I had a choice to go to Anchorage, Alaska, or Greenville, South Carolina. Now, when Jen and I grew up, when you grew up in the Northeast, you probably had 1 degree of prejudice, and that was under no circumstances am I living in the South ever. So I wasn't going to Greenville, South Carolina. I went up to Anchorage, rolled the dice. I knew they had kind of a hardcore hockey following, and went up there and had a great 8 years, just grinding away and making a real good living. I was selling sponsorships. I was doing the travel. I was doing the PR, all the media releases, in addition to play-by-play. So I was working hard, a lot of hours, but I was making good money. And what happened was I kind of backed myself into the corner where it was either make the major leagues or bust. I was at a level basically equivalent, if you're familiar with the baseball structure, to AA hockey. And I couldn't afford really the price of going to AAA. I just got lucky. In 2010, not that long ago, 10 years ago, there was one job open in the entire National Hockey League. It was a Canadian job. I wasn't even going to bother applying. No American had ever broadcast games for a Canadian team in the history of the NHL, which is 100 years old. And I was going to do it. And then we were on our way on vacation, and I just had like a freak out, like a panic. I was literally driving to the airport. We were on our way to a family vacation. I peeled back, threw something together in a manila envelope, hand wrote it in black Sharpie, the mailing address. Do not do that ever. Another mistake. But I tried to do it as neatly as I could. And then luckily there was a U.S. Postal Service building right by the airport. So then I zoomed back. Meanwhile, 2 little kids in the car wondering what the hell's going on. My wife's screaming at me, we're going to be late. And I threw it in there. And sure enough, a month and a half later, I got the job. Just totally random. They had never hired for the position before. The previous guy had done the Oilers for 37 years. And I think that helped me. They looked at anyone and everyone. And I think, living in Alaska, a few people kind of commented, who is this guy from Alaska? Thinks he's applying for an NHL job. Well, as it turned out, one of the former Alaska Aces players was next door neighbors with one of the guys on the hiring committee. And he actually asked her, hey, have you ever heard of this guy? And luckily it was a guy with whom I had a good relationship. If it had been some goalie who was terrible for us and I had ripped him for a year, I probably wouldn't have gotten the job. But this guy was a good player, and we had a good relationship, and that helped. And, it was just one of those things where I got the gig. The other thing that helped is Doc Emmerich, who calls the Stanley Cup for NBC. He had come to one of our, minor league summer meetings one year, and I, just sidled up to him after he gave his presentation and said, "Hey, would you mind listening to my stuff?" And for whatever reason, he really liked it. And so he was on my reference list. And this goes to show you how old school Edmonton handled the search. They actually called a guy on my reference list. I can make no guarantees that people will look at a reference list. I was kind of old school. I mean, I still, did the trifold on the resume as well as my demo tape. And I just got lucky. I mean, they did it the way probably Jen and I were taught how people look at, resumes. Maybe they did back in 95. I don't think they do that anymore. It's all about your reel. It's all about who you know. I'm not sure how many people look at a reference list, but in my case, it actually helped. They called him, and Doc could not have been more gracious. I got the gig, and 10 years later, my kids have basically grown up here, grown up Canadian, and it's a great market. They love their hockey. I don't have to – there's no competition really other than Eskimos, which is a CFL team, a Canadian football team, not near the level of the NFL. So it's actually worked out fairly well. So that's a real brief synopsis. I don't want to prattle on here. I'm sure there's lots of questions and things of that nature, and I can go, specifically into some of that. But I didn't want to go on too long without giving you guys an opportunity to ask some questions. Don't be shy.
One thing that pops into mind for me is, as a successful adult now, what is one thing you would like to tell your college self if you could turn back time?
I would tell them, be prepared for a long chase. I mean, it took me 15 years. I mean, 2010, I graduated in 95. It took me 15 years. I worked with a lot of talent. I mean, Jen and I went to school with some really talented people. You guys probably know some of them. I mean, Kevin Connors was, I think, a year or two behind us. He was a good basketball player and ended up, landing a gig at ESPN. Tim McHugh, who Jen and I took a ton of classes with, helped get Kevin started in his career because Tim is a very successful producer, but he had to, grind it out too. He's at ESPN. I think he was in the Washington, D.C. market for a while. I actually kind of lost track of Tim. One of the reasons Jen and I connected is I actually eventually want to get that information from Jen. But David Muir, I mentioned. Then later, I mean, I don't know whether you guys know, I'm sure you probably do. Ed Cohen's the voice of the Knicks. He's 06. Brendan Burke, voice of the New York Islanders, 06. Brendan and I worked in hockey in the minors for years. And then, after I got my gig, I continued to try to kind of help him, giving him heads up whenever there were job leads and things of that nature. But the other thing I'd say is, as whatever you succeed at in IC, it is a different world. You cannot expect a ton of help from Ithaca or any other stuff. You got to make your own connections. That was never really a strength of mine, and it still isn't today. But that networking thing is key. It really is. Like I said, I mean, I got up some courage and talked to Doc Emmerich. It wasn't necessarily in my nature to go ahead and do that whole, hey, can you help me out kind of thing. But trust me, it does help. So kind of get out of your comfort zone a little bit, and don't be afraid to kind of ask for advice or help or, that kind of thing. And at times I think my younger self was a little too proud, a little too high on my own horse. And when you're at Ithaca and you're achieving at a college level, you inevitably sometimes feel that way. You feel like, well, I'm one of the most talented people on campus. There are thousands upon thousands of people. You do not realize how small a fish you are until you get out into the real world. And that's not a knock on Ithaca, but I'm just telling you that Ithaca and every college environment for that matter is a bit of a bubble. And you got to get out of your bubble. You got to make some contacts that you don't think are going to help you because you'll be surprised. And the other thing I would tell and I wasn't, I don't want to paint myself as but don't ever leave a job, leave IC, don't leave a friendship or an acquaintance with even the hint of a burned bridge. Always take the high road. One of the first mistakes I made as a professional was I was doing again, the small college football, basketball, and baseball thing. But in the morning, I was hosting a news talk show, and then I did probably an hour of commercial production every day where I put my voice on an ad for, say, a furniture store. And I was crabby one day, like kind of early in my gig, but again, already developing that big fish in a small pond mentality. And someone asked me to do an ad last second, and they were supposed to have that production for me in the morning. And I was on my way out. I was meeting someone to play golf and probably go drink a ton of beer or whatever. And she asked me to do it, and I kind of made a big deal out of it, and just acted like an asshole, for lack of a better word, just a jerk. And I remember my boss, who had his own foibles. I mean, he was not the greatest to learn from, but I remember I was 22. He took me in and he goes, Jack, you have a world of talent. You have a world of talent, but you cannot show temper in a professional environment, ever. You can't do it. Like, you just come across as an absolute jerk. And I felt this big, and I should have felt that big. But it was yet another kind of step to kind of straighten me out a little bit. You go to college as an 18-year-old, you come out at 22, and you're a better person. But I would say this: when you're 25, you're a lot more developed than you were at even 22. So just try to kind of foster the idea that, hey, no matter what kind of day you're having, just try to be as pleasant as you possibly can.
Excellent advice. Thank you.
Who else? Come on, don't be shy. You obviously could. Oh, Jake, what do you got?
Hi, how you doing? So I'm a big hockey guy, or watching it. I'm not too good at playing. But I really want to get into the world of play-by-play, and I don't even know where to start practicing. I'm a journalism guy. I'm good at reporting, but play-by-play, I mean, that's quick on your feet kind of stuff. How do you kind of adjust to that?
Does Ithaca not, do you not have the opportunity to call a basketball or I know football is usually a big tryout and it's tough because they only take two, but when I was at Ithaca, there was still club hockey, and I know the school television station called a couple games. I have somewhere on a grainy 3/4 inch tape. Are you, in other words, are you in the mix? Are you putting your name out there for the opportunities to call all kinds of sports at Ithaca? Because I did field hockey, soccer in 30-degree weather. Anything that was out there. I don't know what they've done since. I can't, but I'm just wondering, have you done any of that?
So I have really only considered doing play-by-play as of recently, this year, and I'm a junior. So yeah. I never really got a chance to get into that.
Well, what I would do it's tough now. I think the only thing you can do right now is honestly PBR. NHL Network is doing classics. And I know this may sound extremely corny, but I know Brendan Burke, who's an IC grad, one of the ways he got into the gig is he actually got tickets to an NHL game and sat up in the 500 section and called it into a tape recorder while it was going on. This is 15 years ago. I don't even know whether you can do that. But what I'm saying is, PBR one of those games and practice over the summer. I imagine obviously it's not going to happen this year, but get yourself in the mix or get yourself some reps, just at home. No one's going to be around. Only the people on this call will know that you look like an idiot in your house doing it. Trust me, I've done the same thing. And just call it off the PBR. Get yourself into a rhythm and cadence, and that's how you get reps. Call the same game if you have to, because that way you'll get used to the players, and that way you won't be working. But call it off a TV monitor. There is a distinct possibility that I'm going to be calling the rest of the NHL season maybe off a monitor, maybe in a building with no fans and watching it live, but maybe off a monitor. I've never done it. I've never done it at the NHL level. I'm actually day-to-day thinking how weird that could be for me. But for you, honestly, I know it sounds silly, but PBR a couple games, call it into your phone. Obviously, you don't need a tape recorder these days, but, call it into your phone and keep working on it. And then, when hopefully first semester your senior year starts out, you got football. I don't know whether they still do a football tryout the way they used to, but go in there and knock it out of the park. And if you don't get that, then be willing to go join the ICB staff. And again, some of this information might be antiquated. Hopefully, it's relatively up to date. And I'm sure I'm guessing that Ithaca radio station still does men's and women's basketball, still does some soccer playoff games. The women's soccer team when I was there was excellent. I mean, they did all kinds of sports on the radio, not just and that's a way to get your reps. And maybe you won't be as polished where you're not a legitimate candidate for football play-by-play, but try out anyways. Any rep you get is a rep and makes you better. I mean, I can tell you 100% if I listen to, tapes of me, forget about freshman year, even senior year. I mean, you just get so much better the more you do it. And that's why I would suggest all summer, PBR a couple of hockey games and call them over and over and over again. I know it sounds silly, but that is the only way you're going to get better.
All right. Thank you.
Go ahead. There's a gentleman. John, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, and Jake, I'm the assistant sports director for radio, so just give me your email and we could attach you and you can join radio right away. So that's no issue there. And also Matthias put in the chat that Lorenzo, who's the sports director. So yeah, it's so easy to get involved. But my question for you, Jack, it's concerns with being an Ithaca College student and wanting to get into hockey. You mentioned club hockey, which I think I'm going to try and explore this year. And I know Cam, who's also in this Zoom chat, has tried as well. But was there anything that you did at Ithaca because they didn't have a hockey team to get hockey reps in terms of high school? Or was it just, in your dorm watching it?
I didn't even do Cornell hockey. At the time, there was a guy by the name of Grady Wittenberg who did Cornell hockey, and he did it for like 15 years. Then he wanted to give the NHL a run, and he finally got some games with the Capitals on a substitute basis for John Walton. But no, I didn't. That bridges me to how I got into hockey. I was pretty much like most Ithaca students. I mean, when I got the football play-by-play job my senior year, I was pumped. I mean, that was, at the time, radio football play-by-play was the number one gig. I don't know whether now the television would be, but at the time, Ithaca radio football play-by-play was the number one gig. I got that. I was thrilled. And I, as a senior, I mean, Jen will tell you, everyone will tell you. I mean, I started kind of, again, got the big head mentality. I mostly did football and basketball and baseball. I mean, I wasn't as into doing the other sports because, of course, I was also enjoying my senior year. Jen and I grounded out for 3 years, and then our senior class loads were pretty light. I mean, they were. I had a lot of electives, theater and acting and all that other crap. So, I mean, no offense, but that's honestly the way I treated my senior year. And I wish I had it, to be honest with you. I mean, I make fun of it, but I wish I had it. But the way I really got into hockey is when in Pennsylvania, for whatever reason, my high school team was a good team. And so when I had to crawl back to my hometown, I was doing small college football, basketball, and baseball. The hockey guy in our hometown who did a local radio package of maybe 15 games, he left to work for a state senator. And so the sports director asked me, hey, the program director said, hey, do you want to pick up the hockey? And I said, yeah, sure. I did, a game at Ithaca. I'll figure it out. And so I did 3 years of high school hockey. I mean, lowest of the low, Pennsylvania. I mean, it wasn't like Michigan or Minnesota or New England. I mean, it was, relatively low rent hockey. But what happened is again, the team was pretty good. And they used to play, Pennsylvania's a square. It's basically Pittsburgh and Philly and Alabama in between the sticks. But they play the West Final at the home of the Penguins and the East Final at the home of the Flyers. So what happened is the team that I, was doing 10, 15 games for was playing in the West Final at 2:00 and the Penguins were playing at 7. And the game happened to go into double overtime. And so the Penguins guys, I didn't even know this, but were right behind me, both the TV guy and the radio guy. And they're both still in the league now. And when I was done, they came up to me and said, hey, you know, who are you, blah, blah, blah. And I was telling him what I do, he goes, well, listen, you know, there's a ton of people who can do college football and basketball, but you can do hockey, and there's not many people out there who can do it. Like, that is a skill. You should follow up on hockey. And 3 months later, I was moving to Colorado Springs. I mean, that totally was a game changer for me in terms of, I didn't even know, you know, again, for most of my life, I didn't know what I didn't know. And that's the key. You know, Jen said, what could you tell your younger self? Figure out what you don't know. Like, don't be afraid. And so from then on, so in your case, you know, whether it's club hockey or, again, whether it's relatively rudimentary where you PVR a game on, you know, especially in this day and age where we don't have live sporting events, don't be afraid to PVR. NBC is running Stanley Cup Finals games every Sunday in the afternoon. PVR one of those and practice. That's all I can tell you right now, with the limited resources at your disposal. Then obviously next year, if you can get some hockey games on the air, by all means do it. I don't know whether you still have VIC as a secondary outlet the way I did. We were running sports often on two different stations. But, you know, that would be obviously great. And you know what I did is when I was doing the high school hockey, I turned that 15-game package into a 30-game package. Now, I didn't do it for the reason to get more reps. I did it for the extra $75 a game. I figured, well, here's a way I can just slip more money into the budget for myself. But the byproduct of that was, instead of doing 15 games a year, I was doing 30 and getting that much better. So, again, reps.
Thank you.
Sure. Matthias, what's up?
Hey, thanks for taking my question. I really appreciate it. So I actually was the play-by-play voice for football on radio this past year, and I was the host for the Gridiron Report. So
congratulations, that's awesome.
Thank you. It was nice to see some things in common. I graduated a semester early, so I graduated in December from the class of 2020, and I'm very thankful that I got a lot of opportunities to do a lot of different sports at Ithaca. But my only concern now is I didn't get a chance to do baseball, for example, and I've done a lot more. I've been trying to do like a game a week, and I've been getting feedback from people, which has been great. And I feel like I keep improving, and I've been practicing football and soccer as well. But now I feel like my content on my reel is a little outdated. And now I've been sending that off to employers, and a lot of things that I've gotten feedback for on my reel itself, I now feel like I can improve on and I can call better now. So I guess my question is what you think about putting, you know, games that you're calling at home that aren't at a live stadium. How you feel about putting that on a reel, or is there any way you can use that besides just getting feedback?
I'd rather do that. And this is a story. I'd rather do what you're doing. And here's a story that, you know, it had a happy ending. But it didn't at the time, and then it turned out to be the best thing I ever, you know, they say some jobs are the ones you don't get or the ones you don't take. But I'll never forget, in the winter of 2002, I was in Alaska and I wasn't sure about it. It was my first year, and I was like, holy cow, the isolation is kicking in a little bit. And there was this baseball job in Frisco, Texas with some people that I knew. And, you know, I sent them my updated hockey tape. And they said, hey, do you have any baseball? You know, I mean, but they didn't say it emphatically. They just said, hey, do you have any baseball? And I sent them the last baseball game I ever did, which was in 1999. And that was right. So I did, you know, that high school state playoff game I was telling you about, then the baseball season, and then I was off to Colorado for my first hockey job. So I sent them that 1999 baseball tape. And all of a sudden, it kind of went cold, and they ended up going with someone else. And, you know, I was – and, like, the people I knew there strangely wouldn't get back to me. But I ended up getting – like, I ended up finally the original person who just was collecting resumes and stuff. I finally got her on the phone and said, look, my friends are kind of being weird. And by friends, these were older people, but these were people I'd worked with in hockey for. So, you know, my friends were being kind of weird. What was the deal? What happened? And I'll never forget. She goes, you know, to be honest with you, that old baseball tape did not help you. So there you go. There's your answer. I mean, that's someone who didn't know the sport, who was just in charge of and even she heard through the grapevine, old stuff does not help you. If you've improved, send your new stuff. They don't care whether, they're not going to really care about sound. Of course it helps to have but if you've gotten better and appreciably better and you can tell on your tape, do not send an old tape. I'll never forget that. And in retrospect, it was really stupid. Now, I'm glad I didn't take it. Who knows? I could have been stuck in Texas and, then I would have been, those 3 years in hockey. Who knows? I might have been 3 years behind the eight ball, or who knows? I might have turned out to be the voice of the Texas Rangers. I don't know. But bottom line is that submission of an old work hurt me.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Matthew.
Hi, Jack. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thank you. So I, like Matthias, am a senior as well, and I've done some play-by-play from sophomore year on, specifically with IC Sports Radio. And I, like other seniors, want to get into play-by-play or something within the sports media professional world. However, due to the pandemic, it may be difficult for us to find a job straight out of college right now. Obviously, we don't know who's hiring, and also we don't know when sports are going to come back, when leagues are going to start up again, and we don't know also what's going to happen with the start of next year, depending on how long we deal with this. So my question is, what advice do you have for seniors like me, and what is the best way to approach this? Like, for example, should we do what you did when you came out of school, which was like go into news and everything else that you did? What advice do you have for us?
I will say this, that, as much as I kind of make fun of it now, because some of it was, we used to bring in on that news talk station, we used to bring in a guy who'd tell you how to get rid of rodents. I mean, we brought in a gardener. I mean, some of it I remember thinking, I went to school for this. Like, I'm actually talking to this person. We had these regular guests. I mean, some of it was insurance. But I'll tell you what, some of it was, the governor of Pennsylvania at the time was Thomas Ridge, who, if you look him up, he turned out to be director of Homeland Security. And it made me better. I had to prepare for an hour interview with the governor. Even the classic rock DJing that I did, you're still on the air. You're still communicating with people. It is not what you want to do, but it's a means to an end. For me, this was the guts of it. And it enabled me to do sports at night. I couldn't have made a living just doing sports, not at $75 a game. So I would encourage you to, if you've got a small town near your hometown, or maybe you know someone in your hometown that works for the radio station, or know someone that does, I would try to get on the air in any way, shape, or form. And that goes for television too. Even if you're, I did a TV internship where, I was editing my own stuff, putting together a package here and there, doing some grunt work. Any fringe opportunity in the business, I would say take advantage of it, because right now there are a few on-air opportunities. You're exactly right. You're in a real tough bind right now. It would be brutal. I mean, you can't enjoy your senior year the way we did. And now the job market is going to be iffy in the fall. It absolutely sucks to be a graduating senior right now. I totally get it. It's crappy. I can't imagine if that had happened my senior year. But look at it as an opportunity. While other people are whatever, just sitting around, try to be as proactive as you can right now, starting now. I mean, send an email to your local newspaper. Like, even if it's, again, the fringes of the business, try to latch on to something. And that means starting now. I mean, preparing for, the worst case scenario. You never know what might come of it.
And if I could just quickly follow up on that,
Sure.
It sort of relates to what Matthias was asking before. When it comes to taking this as an opportunity and trying to do stuff without there being anything out there really going on right now, would stuff like doing sort of sports conversations on that are recorded and put on a YouTube or anything like that? Like, could we put a reel together with that kind of material? Would that count?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're interested in sports talk, or, Max Kellerman used to just ruminate for 15 minutes on some aspect of boxing and would send that to ESPN. I mean, whatever you think of Max Kellerman now, and I don't think much, when he did boxing, he could talk about it. So if you've got a buddy that you want to do a podcast, even doing the podcast, even if no one listens or no one pays attention to it on YouTube, you're still giving yourself reps. You're still forcing yourself to speak lucidly on a subject. And I'm still, to this day, much more comfortable behind a mic than I am speaking in front of 1,000 people. The last public event I did for the Edmonton Oilers, I actually hosted a women's leadership conference. I mean, you talk about being totally out of my element. I was there with probably, there was probably 350 people there, and there might have been 40 guys. I mean, it was an intimidating setting. And, as you could probably tell, I am not as comfortable public speaking. So the more you do, the more you talk with a recorder in front of you, you will get better. And you will learn to communicate your thoughts and phrase things in a certain way that's, communicable and easily understandable on the other end.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Anything and everything is the short answer there.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Chat, or if you want, you can throw it in a chat if you don't want to take yourself off mute. Is that about all she wrote? Oh, no, Cameron, go ahead.
Thanks for taking my question. I've done some hockey broadcasts myself in my local town for like the high school hockey, and I've tried, I think John said it a few times, at the club hockey team in Ithaca. What's your trick to keeping track of the flow of the game while also broadcasting, like looking down at the stat sheet and roster while looking back up to follow the gameplay and what's going on?
Well, I've got a few cheat sheets with me, actually, and I write everything out manually. I'm old school. So, for instance, this was Washington's lineup the last time we played them, and I do it old school on a manila folder, and I write it out. I don't do computer stuff because I'm of a certain age where it was easier to learn. And let me see if I'm centering this properly. Yeah, basically.
It's good, yeah.
I learn by writing. I don't learn by typing. So it became in my head, how many times Ovechkin has scored 50, or where John Carlson played his college hockey, or, whoever scored a goal for Team Canada in the World Juniors in 2014. I remember it by writing it down on these sheets. That's for every team, for every game. And I update it. Obviously, we play Washington twice a year. So if I need to wipe out a guy because he's hurt, I can do that, no problem, and I keep the other information intact. Then I've got a scorebook for every game I've ever done for as long as I broadcast, even when I was just doing high school. So down here are the lineups for both teams. Again, written out, and there's stuff like 5 goals in his last 7 games next to his statistics, but there's goals, assists, and points right there. Over here in this mess is a scoring summary, and if you look up top there, there's just random notes, whatever. Bruce Boudreau's coach for 7 different teams and never had a losing season, or whatever. Like, just random stuff. So writing all that down and having that at my disposal kind of pumps it into my head so that I'm not necessarily looking down on it. I can at the breaks. Obviously, I've got a color guy. I don't know whether you would necessarily have a color guy if you're just doing a play-by-play broadcast. But obviously, there's breaks in the games where if I need to check something or if I need to check a note, because I've written it down and because even though it looks like an absolute mess, it's my mess, so I know where everything is on the page, I can double-check it. The rest of the time, I'm focused on the game. The other thing about game prep, especially when it comes to hockey, is you're only using 5% of it. You really are. Don't feel compelled whenever you're doing a broadcast. Don't feel compelled to show what you know by just blabbing on statistics incessantly. the only one that cares about the preparation that you've done is you. Everyone else just expects it. When you listen to when you watch a World Series game, you're not waiting for Joe Buck to impress you with how much he studied by telling you that Red Schoendienst was the manager of the 1968 Cardinals that lost to the Tigers in 7 games. If it comes up naturally during the telecast, then fine. It'll make sense at the time. But you're not waiting for him to prove to you that you've done the work. So what I would tell you is, with all of the preparation you do and what you're talking about, trying to refer to certain things during the flow of game, never do it at the expense of the flow of the game. In hockey in particular, it's more important who has the puck, what team they play for, where the puck is, score and time. The basic fundamentals. Location, location, location. And when it comes to your audience, always remember, excuse me, I'm very big on team identification. Whereas some of you out there are probably thinking, well, Jack, if I say Brockport comes up the ice, that's an indicator that, maybe I don't know who the player is. Well, just say Brockport's Dawson comes up the ice. Because you know what? No one knows who the hell Dawson is. Even at the NHL level, I'll say Connor McDavid of Edmonton periodically. Not every time, but I'll get an identifier in there. Ovechkin for the Caps, 40 goals in each of his last 8 years. Just not every time, but even for those superstars, just because you've got to remember that most of your audience is a casual audience. They're not all hardcore nerds like I was. And Jen can verify, you don't get nerdier than I was when it comes to knowing sports and stuff like that. But the ultimate thing is no one cares. So just call the play-by-play. Make sure they know who has what, where. And this is the same for basketball, whatever. Basketball, you got 5 guys, so you don't have to do it as often, but still, you got to remember that no one knows that, Brockport's Jamie Downs is averaging 20 points a game. That no one knows who Downs is. You got to identify him. You got to tell them that this is Brockport's leading scorer, maybe 3-4 times a game. Because, again, most of your audience are IC guys. They know a guy because they, meet him in the dining hall, but they don't really care about some of that other stuff. So that's what I would say on that is prepare, but know that you're probably only going to use 5% of it. But I'll tell you what, it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So do the work.
Thank you.
Matthias, go ahead.
So I've never been a big hockey guy, and I wanted to, learn more about the sport and start getting used to watching it as well, just so I can start putting some on my reel, or if I can apply to a job that has hockey in it and I'm not completely in the dark.
I was the same way. I played NHL 94 in college. That was the extent of my I mean, it's the greatest video game ever assembled to this day. I don't even want to hear an argument. I'll dismiss you from the call if you try to argue otherwise. NHL 94 was the greatest game ever, and that's how I learned the game.
I won't bring up MVP baseball then. But I guess just pertaining strictly to hockey, because I've had to do it for field hockey before when I called it for Ithaca, that I tried to learn how the game works. But any sport-specific advice you have for someone trying to, get used to the sport or anything? Because I'm basically starting from zero with hockey.
Yeah, I would go to the coach. If you know a player, go to a player. I did a field hockey game. I did a women's soccer game. And what I did is I went straight to the coach, or if I knew a girl on the team, it actually gave me an excuse to try to strike up a conversation with a female. Which, if you talk to Jen, you'll know that I was painfully inadequate when it came to that. But that honestly is the best way to get the knowledge. Find a classmate who plays it or knows a ton about it, and start get. And then the next step is, whether it's a club coach or the field hockey, I just go straight to the coach and apologize. Just say, look, I need 20 minutes of your time. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about here. Like, help me out. And coaches, just like everyone else, they love talking about themselves. They love talking about, the sport in which they're a part of, especially if it's a bit of a niche sport. There's no person out there in field hockey or lacrosse who isn't eager to get someone else kind of into the mix. Brendan Burke's a perfect example. He did lacrosse this year for NBC this past summer. And again, I didn't pay any attention to it, but he got into it. And I'm sure he probably didn't know it anywhere near as well as he knew hockey. Maybe he did a lacrosse game at Ithaca like I did, but that's what you do. You go straight to the coaches, straight to a couple of players or classmates you might know, and go from there.
Thank you.
Cameron, you got your hand up again? Nope. Sorry, it's just extended. Anyone else? Max, is that shielding the glare, or is that a hand up? If it's a hand up, go ahead. There you go.
Thank you. So I have two questions.
Sure.
My first one is, did you use Jeremy Rodick a lot on NHL 94?
Absolutely.
And
he used to bloody up Gretzky against the glass.
Yeah, he was overpowered.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how much would you say your prep work for the Exterminator or the Governor on the radio, helped you today in your current role?
Well, what I meant by that is, in some ways, you could make the argument that prepping for that kind of interview with the Governor, Tom Ridge, allowed me, whatever it was, 23 years later, to host that women's leadership conference. It gets you into conversations with people that you don't run across. And when Jen and I went to Ithaca, I remember a ton of overlap with the School of Music, for instance. But you know what? I wish I had branched out a little bit more and met some more of those people. When you run across someone who is interested in completely other things than you are, you instantly become a little bit smarter at the end of that conversation. And that is something that when I was 20 years old, I was interested in girls and sports. And I couldn't get out of that little kind of, comfort zone. I couldn't, I wouldn't waste my time finding out more about people that I didn't really know in my classes. And I should have. Like, it makes you a more well-rounded person. It makes you better equipped to have a conversation with just about anyone. And when you're in the communications business, whether you're a producer, the other thing is technical people. I still like to talk to those people as much as anything today, because then when there's a mistake or something like that, there's no reason to get upset, because that person has just a difficult job as you do. It's not, it's not any more or less difficult than your job, but you have an understanding. And that was the great thing about Ithaca, is I remember, running a camera and directing and TDing, is you have an appreciation that, hey, just because you don't do it doesn't mean that it's easy or any less challenging. You have an appreciation for what that person does. And that's why I'd say to you, when it comes to, meeting people in different phases, and I know I'm going to sound like an old man on this, like talking to younger people, go talk to someone you wouldn't normally talk to. That's such a dad thing to say. But honestly, it serves you well down the line when you find yourself in a room with people you wouldn't normally socialize or work with. You're able to survive because you have that additional experience of talking to people whose interests do not mirror your own. It's another thing I'd tell my young self.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I've probably lost everyone by prattling on as long as I have on some of these answers. I apologize for that. I'm a broadcaster. Sue me. Oh, go ahead, Matthew. You got one more?
Yeah, so I'm someone who's never done hockey. I've watched some hockey over the past several years, but I can't even imagine what it's like to call a hockey game. I always say to myself, how is it that people like Doc Emmerich don't have a heart attack when they're calling games like that? So my question to you is, what's a day in the life of actually calling a hockey game? Do you feel like it's rushed? Do you feel like you feel more on pace as the day moves along? Like what's it like calling a hockey game?
It's not any different than any other sport. The preparation is the same, whether it's a morning shoot around or batting practice at 3 o'clock if it's Major League Baseball. NHL has its morning skate. You know, you're a split shift worker except in baseball, where I imagine you arrive at the park at 3 and don't leave at 11. The other sports, hockey and basketball for sure, is you get there at 10 in the morning. You talk to players and coaches on both teams. You've already done your prep at night, unless it's the second of a back-to-back in which you're doing it on the plane on the way to the next city. But you meet, players and coaches from both teams in the morning. That takes you from 10 to about 1 o'clock. You go home. You review any notes you might have. You send in whatever sound you might have collected, or if you need to do that kind of thing, and then you're back to the rink around 5 o'clock for a 7 o'clock game, and you settle in. And I don't eat or drink before the game. I'll usually have about a 3 o'clock meal, and then that's it. A full broadcaster can be a slow-witted broadcaster, and I've got enough problems with that already. I don't need to shove down a huge 2,000-calorie meal before a game. I want to be a little hungry, a little snarl, and that's naturally more energy. And from 5 to 7, I'm jotting down a few notes. I'm talking to the other team's broadcasters. I'm whatever, anything that might slip into the broadcast at a particular point in time. And then I like to clear my head, and I just watch warm-up at 6:30, much as basketball. There's warm-ups at 6:30, and that's one final chance for me to just kind of identify any players, make sure the lineups are what I predicted. In other words, I'll take that Philadelphia lineup and make sure the lines and the D pairings are what I prepared for. You never know. There's always a late illness. I mean, I have nearly been caught a couple of times just assuming, and sure enough, there's a scratch. The goalie always leads the team out, so you make sure the starting goalie is who you know it was, and then you just clear your head. You just take a deep breath, settle in, and not that I go into any sort of meditation, but I just chill. I'll have a casual conversation with a coworker or whatever, but and then it's time to go. I mean, it's no different than any other sport. Basketball is nearly the same routine. MLB, I'm sure there's lots of conversations around the cage, and then you go up and same thing. Between 5 and 7, you're shooting the shit with whoever and clearing your head and maybe taking a final note or two. I've sat in with the Angels guys when we've been in Orange County and things like that in the playoffs. Well, we've only made the playoffs once in my 10 years here, so one time. But, it's all a routine, no matter the sport. And reps take away that feeling of rush, because if you're prepared, you never feel rushed.
Thank you.
Sure. Jay Silverstein, is that you with a hand up?
Yeah, it's Josh.
Josh, sorry.
No, sorry, I wasn't signed into the Zoom. Going off of Matt's question, how does your preparation for a game change when you're doing home games in Edmonton versus games on the road in New York or wherever?
Well, that's an interesting question, because the Rangers don't practice at MSG. I mean, there's too much going on there. A lot of road teams actually these days have a separate practice rink, and their time might be in conflict with ours, in which case I got to make a decision. And it's just a matter of, at that point, whether I'm going to get an interesting conversation going. Sometimes it'll be the team that dictates it. In other words, all right, I like their coach, I like their assistant. There's a few players I could talk to, or you know what, they're pretty cookie cutter. You don't get much out of it. In which case, I can use the website. The opposing team's website these days, as I'm sure you guys know, all the audio from that morning's press conference and stuff are up on the website, so I can take a peek at that. There's all kinds of things like The Athletic, for instance, and other news outlets. You can obviously pull it up all online on your phone now, and I can just, hey, here's an article that says Logan Couture is pissed because he's only playing 16 minutes a night as opposed to 20. I mean, you can get a feel for what's going on in another city or in another team without going there necessarily, but I try to go there whenever possible. So especially if there's not much going on with our team. if there's not a huge angle that I need to go over with a coach, I'll often leave the color guy to do our guys, so to speak, and I go to the visiting. That's usually the way it shakes out on the road, unless, again, like the Rangers or the Capitals, where it's a prohibitive distance between where I'm at and where I need to be or whatever. If it's 30 minutes, I might just call it a day. But if it's 30 minutes and I know I'm going to get some good stuff, I'll make the trip.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. Anyone else? I got nothing to do. Is that another hand up, Max, or are you just shielding?
I have another hand up.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
How sort of crazy is your day on deadline day? Especially if the Oilers are talking to people, or the opponent that day is talking to people. Are you sort of scrambling? Or are you just sort of sitting back and waiting to see what happens? What's your day like on a day like that?
Like trading deadline day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I you know what? I do usually a couple of appearances for our a couple of hits on our local station, the flagship station for the Oilers. But the rest of the time, I'm on Twitter like everyone else. I mean, I'm not, and I don't really need to do anything other than talk to our coach and GM after the day's done, just to get a brief. It's usually not on a game day. We have had a couple on a game day, and it's usually just to get a summation of what they were thinking going in and what they're thinking coming out. And again, depending on who the coach, who the GM is, you're again at their mercy. In other words, how much they want to share. Some of the time, you can get some real good stuff. I remember our trade deadline day this year was in Orange County, and Ken Holland, our GM, said, "You know what? The players have earned the opportunity for me to be active on trade deadline day. I needed to show that I'm in the room with them, and that's why I went out and got a couple players." And that's what we led our broadcast with. It was a pretty strong statement. You don't often hear a GM say, "I owed it to the players. They've had a surprisingly good year, and I owed them to get some help." I thought that was worthy of something, and so there's where a 5-minute conversation with him, ended up leading off our broadcast. But again, it varies day by day. Some of the days, I'll tell you this. There was one more example of where we didn't do that in 2013. We got some fourth line center, and our captain said, "That's who we got for," and I didn't use it right away because obviously I worked for the team, so I had to use some discretion. But when we lost 5 in a row, I slipped it in there and said, you wonder whether that was a turning point in the season where the team didn't feel like the GM did what it could.
Well, we are at the 2:00 mark, and I want to be mindful of your time. So,
well, that's fine. I mean, if there was any last second questions, I'm good. I mean, again, mindful of my time, Jen, is I am literally doing nothing. But if everyone's wrapped up, then that's good too. We can wrap it up. I want to be mindful of everyone else's time too. And Jen, one thing, if people are shy or if they think of a question later, you've got my information. I think I gave you my cell phone too. You know what? I'll just throw it in the chat here. But don't be shy. If you want to shoot me a text or you want to shoot me an email, go ahead and do that. And I'm, even when everything gets going, I'm always, I think, pretty good about getting back to people and helping where I can. And if you have demos of your work that you want to send me and, for whatever reason think I'd be a good guy to bounce some ideas off you about your current demo reel, by all means, just shoot it to that email address and I'll get back to you.
Thank you.
thank you so much. This has been
Thank you.
fantastic. And you have given some great insight and advice to these students. So I can guarantee you will be getting texts and emails because this is a very engaged bunch. So
Good.
thank
I'm
you
glad.
so much. I really appreciate your willingness to do this.
Sure, Jen, and spread the word. If Park or if there's another avenue that wants to do this kind of thing, I'm game for anything and everything.
Absolutely. We will take you up on that. Don't you worry.
Please do. Please do.
All right. Take care. Thanks again. It was good to see you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank
great
you very
seeing
much.
all of you. Take care. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
your time.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.